Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Nick Defenthaler, and I am a lead financial planner here at the center, as well as the director of our firm's financial planning department. As I'm sure many of you on the call today can certainly attest to, applying for financial aid and completing the FAFSA can oftentimes be a pretty intimidating task. So really our goal today is to provide some helpful education and touch on some areas that can oftentimes create confusion when going through the process of applying for schools, scholarships, and ultimately completing your financial aid forms. And being that paying for your child or grandchild's higher education could quite possibly be one of the largest expenses in your entire lifetime, we'll also be providing some commentary on how you might consider incorporating college planning into your own unique comprehensive financial game plan. So today, I am very excited to be joined once again by Dr. Carrie Gilchrist with Oakland University for our discussion today. Carrie has worked in higher education for over 20 years and has spent the last 11 years working in financial aid. Carrie earned her master's degree in college student affairs leadership in 2004 and completed her Ph.D. in educational leadership at Oakland University in 2013. Carrie currently serves as the Senior Financial Aid Outreach Advisor at Oakland University, which affords her the opportunity to travel throughout southeastern Michigan, offering college readiness and financial aid preparation to middle and high school students, parents, and professionals. I actually met Carrie about 2 or 3 years ago at a local financial planning conference, and she was there speaking to a room full of financial advisors on, the FAFSA and college planning and student loans and things of that nature. And I was really blown away by her knowledge and expertise in this area. So we really leverage Carrie's knowledge and her being such a great resource quite often for client situations. So I'm really glad to have her back once again to give us some guidance in this area. Like I said, that can be very, very confusing for many people when you're going through that process of applying for financial aid. Just one quick housekeeping item, because we want to be respectful of everyone's time today, we will not be taking questions on the call, but I encourage you to reach out to me after the webinar if you do have follow-up questions. My email address should be popping up here in just a second. There we go. So it's nick.defenthaler@centerfinplan.com. Feel free to reach out to me with any follow-up questions that you might have, and I'd be happy to direct them to Carrie and certainly circle back with you with an answer. I'd also encourage you to check out our website, www.centerfinplan.com. We have countless blogs, webinars, resources on college planning, financial aid, and a myriad of other financial planning related items as well if you're ever interested in gathering educational content. So with that, I will hand it off to Carrie.
Thanks so much, Nick, for having me today. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Gilchrist. I'm the Senior Financial Aid Outreach Advisor at Oakland University. And before we begin, I just want to emphasize that even though I work for Oakland University, this is not an Oakland-specific presentation. The information that I share with you today is going to be able to be used at any school your student chooses to attend. So some of the items that we're going to be talking about today are the elements of financial aid, kind of what's included in that umbrella term. We'll also talk about the free application for federal student aid, also known as the FAFSA. We'll talk about sources of financial aid, where all that money comes from, changes in financial circumstances, should they occur after you file the FAFSA or while your student is in college, and kind of what to do about those. And then we'll go over some next steps that both you, as a parent and as a student, are able to kind of go through quickly here to jump into financial aid with both feet. So without further ado, there are actually 4 types of financial aid. There's scholarships, grants, student employment, and loans. And those 4 types of financial aid are broken down a little bit further into 3 different categories. I don't have slide control over on this end, so if you guys can switch that slide. There you go. There's merit-based scholarships, which is based on a student's academic accomplishments, so their GPA, their ACT, and their SAT scores. There's also need-based aid, which is partially figured by when the college or university processes the FAFSA application, but it includes grants, federal work study, and subsidized loans. And those are awarded based on the student's financial need again, which is partially calculated by FAFSA. There's also non-need-based aid, which includes unsubsidized student loans and Parent Plus loans. And those are awarded without any regard for financial need or merit. Those are strictly awarded to students because they're college students. Those 4 types of financial aid can come from 4 different resources. The federal and state governments provide financial aid to students, as do the colleges and universities they attend. And then there's private resources, foundations, organizations, companies, and even private individuals that like to give scholarships to students. Most students' first step in applying for financial aid is to complete the FAFSA. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is not, there's not any fee associated with submitting that application. You also don't have to hire anyone to complete it for you. There's lots of free financial aid help that you can get to complete the application if you do struggle with it. The FAFSA is used to award federal, state, and most college or university aid with some exceptions that we'll go over here shortly. And in order to access the FAFSA, each student and at least one parent in the household must create what's called an FSA ID. And the FSA ID is a username and password that is unique to each individual to allow students the ability to access their FAFSA, sign it electronically. They'll also use the FSA ID while they're in college to access federal websites related to their financial aid. And then they'll use it after they've graduated if they choose to borrow loans during their repayment process. Parents will also use the FSA ID to sign the student's FAFSA electronically. And if a parent chooses to borrow a Parent Plus loan, they'll use it during that process as well. You can create the FSA ID online at fsaid.ed.gov, and that should be done at least a week before completing the FAFSA. Students should begin filing their FAFSA October 1st of their senior year of high school or shortly thereafter, and they should complete that process every year on October 1st or again shortly thereafter. The reason we tell students to file the FAFSA so early is because some financial aid is given on a first-come, first-served basis. So the earlier a student fills out their FAFSA, the bigger and better their financial aid package could be. So October 1st is the earliest a student can fill out their FAFSA in order to apply for financial aid for the following year.
And Carrie, wasn't there a recent change surrounding the due date on, or I should say the start date when you can begin filing for the FAFSA?
Yes, about last year was the first date that the October 1st date was in effect. Prior to that, the earliest the FAFSA was available was January 1st of the senior year. And the change to October 1st has really benefited students in giving them those 3 extra months to get an award letter and determine where their best fit is in school and financially. So it's really given students a lot of extra time. In addition to that date change for the availability, they've also changed the tax information that the FAFSA requires. So it used to be that you would have to project what your taxes were going to say once you filed, but now they're using taxes that you filed the prior April. So this coming October 1st, 2017, seniors are going to file their FAFSA for their freshman year of 2018-19, and they're going to use tax information from 2016 that was just filed this past April.
Okay, great.
The proper place to file a FAFSA, or the most preferred place, is FAFSA.gov. There is a paper application available, but we would really prefer that students file their FAFSA online for a number of reasons, but primarily because filing online is much faster. The paper application takes the Department of Ed about 6 to 8 weeks to process. But if you file a FAFSA online, it takes them only 3 to 5 days. So it is a much faster process that makes that information available to schools so much quicker. If you're concerned about putting your information online, the federal website is a secure one. The process by which they transfer that information to schools is also secure. And then schools have their own safety measures, of course, to make sure your information is kept private. My absolute favorite part of the FAFSA is the data retrieval tool, and that allows most users to upload their tax information directly from the IRS website onto the FAFSA. So that means you don't have to pick through any paper returns or try and decipher any lingo that you're unfamiliar with. It just does it automatically. And in that process, it certifies with the IRS that this is actually what you filed. That helps schools later on down the road if they need to verify the FAFSA information, then they don't have to go through that step of verifying the tax return. There's also skip logic, which is a very helpful tool in entering any answer on the FAFSA. The FAFSA sorts through the remaining questions and removes anything that no longer applies to you based on your previous answers. So that makes the FAFSA so much shorter and so much more relevant to your household because it's only asking questions about your household specifically. There's also
now, Carrie,
yep.
I'm sorry to jump in or cut you off. I just have one quick question. Now, I hear a lot of times from clients, you know, I believe my earnings are at a level where, it really won't make sense for me to take the time to even fill this out. Do you have a sense of, if you're utilizing technology efficiently, how long does it typically take to fill the FAFSA out?
About 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay. So it could very well be worth the time spent, is probably what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I always tell students that there's a federal threshold to be eligible for grants, but there's also an institutional threshold. So I hear a lot of times, we're not going to get anything anyway. And you really don't know that until you fill out the FAFSA, because at the very least, students are going to be awarded loans, which may not be something that you're really seeking out. But even if a student is not eligible for a federal grant, they could still be eligible for a college or university grant, and they would never know unless they fill out the application.
That's a great point. We actually, and just a real quick success story from the webinar that we hosted last year. We had a client actually who attended who, earns a very nice living, did not expect whatsoever to receive any sort of financial aid by completing the FAFSA, wasn't even going to fill it out, and then ultimately listened to the webinar that Carrie hosted for us last year, and Carrie really pounded the table like she's doing right now to, make sure you fill it out. Everyone should complete it, no matter what you think your situation might look like. And it ended up working out where the client's son received a sizable institution grant because of the type of tuition and how the formulas worked out with income and where tuition levels were, et cetera. So it really paid off for him to do that. And a week prior to attending the webinar, he would more than likely would not have even taken the time to apply. So that was a real cool success story. So for everyone on the call today, just I think reinforces the point, take the 20 or 30 minutes to fill it out, and you never know what might come out of it.
That's really great to hear.
Yeah.
When you submit the FAFSA, you're going to provide demographic information, taxed and untaxed income information, and sometimes, but not always, asset information. In some cases, families will not have to provide asset information, but if there's a possibility that you will, FAFSA will do a calculation after you've completed the income information to determine your asset threshold. If there's a possibility, they're going to ask you the following question. If you can go to the next slide.
Sure.
Does the net worth of your assets exceed a specific amount? The amount they ask you about is the asset threshold. So if the net worth of your assets exceeds the asset threshold, you say yes, and you answer 3 additional questions. The 3 additional questions they're going to ask about assets is grouped into, the first question is cash, savings, and checking account balances as of the day that you're filling out the FAFSA, as of that moment. They're also going to ask about investments, stocks, bonds, things like that. They're also going to ask the third question, which is about if you own a business, any equipment, buildings, et cetera, any assets associated with that business. If your assets do not exceed that asset threshold they ask about, then you would say no, and you'd move on with the application. There are families that are not required to provide asset information, but if your family is one of the few that have to provide that information, it's not going to affect the total amount of financial aid the student is receiving. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's actually it impacts the end result of the FAFSA a very small amount, about 12%.
So that's a common thing that I also hear is, there's concern that doing the right thing and saving for college and the 529 plans and things of that nature can ultimately end up hurting students. Have you seen that in your experience, Carrie?
Most of the time not. It doesn't actually hurt students. The investments do include 529 plans if families are required to report assets on the FAFSA. But again, that asset information contributes toward the end result of the FAFSA, about 12%. So it doesn't significantly impact the type of financial aid a student is going to get. It may, you know, it may impact, you know, switching around a little bit of, you know, grants and things like that, but it's not going to make a huge difference. And it's not at all going to impact the amount, the total amount of financial aid the student is eligible for.
Interesting. And I know in the past with clients who, you know, they've accumulated 529 plans for their children, you know, we might not use those or recommend that they use those till maybe the junior or senior year, depending on when these new filing deadlines came into play, just because of when distributions are reported out of the 529 plans, et cetera. So there is some unique planning that you can take advantage of potentially as well to help out with, I guess, how those distributions for the 529 plan can impact aid. So that's something that we've also seen.
Well, in the 529 plans, whether they're MESPs, MET contracts, or some other 529 savings plan, they are not going to count on the student's award letter as part of their financial aid. Because it's the family's personal savings, it doesn't count as a financial aid award. So it's not going to negatively impact the rest of the financial aid they're eligible for either. Right.
So the main takeaway, I think, is continue to save for college. It's a good thing. It won't blow this up, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, great.
So speaking of the end result of the FAFSA, the expected family contribution is the first thing that kind of happens once you submit the FAFSA. And the expected family contribution is, by definition, the amount that the Federal Department of Education thinks a student and their family will be able to contribute toward the educational expenses of the student. Now, this is not necessarily something that parents always consider to be the most reasonable number, and that's okay, because colleges and universities don't use it in the way you might expect. We actually use it to determine the type of financial aid the student is eligible for, rather than the total amount of financial aid the student is eligible for. And if you switch slides, the second thing to happen when you submit a FAFSA is the student aid report is developed. And that's something that's emailed to the student after the FAFSA has been processed, so about 3 to 5 days after submission. And it gives a list of all the questions and answers that are provided on the FAFSA. This is an excellent time to review that information and make sure that you didn't make any errors. Sometimes if you're going along too quickly, it can be really easy to add an extra 0 onto the end of your household number or the end of your wages, and then suddenly that throws all the financial aid off. So if you go and take the student aid report and review that information, if there are any errors that need to be corrected, you just go back onto FAFSA.gov, make the correction, and resubmit the application. So while all of that processing is going on with FAFSA, colleges and universities are making their own preparations for student financial aid packages. We're calculating what's called the estimated cost of attendance. And the estimated cost of attendance is going to be different at every school because all of their costs are different. However, we also use the same formula to get to that information. So every college and university is going to calculate their cost of attendance by estimating the direct charges. So these are charges that the student will be charged for directly by the college or university. So for things like tuition, room and board if the student's going to live on campus, and mandatory fees if the college charges such a thing. They're also going to estimate indirect expenses the student might experience. So these are things that the college or university doesn't charge for directly, but that a student still has to pay for related to their education. So those are things like books, transportation, if they're going to live off campus or at home, and there's some charges associated with that. And then living expenses, things that, you know, they need for every day, the toothbrush, toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, that kind of stuff. When we add all those direct charges and indirect expenses together, that tells us the student's cost of attendance. Now, the cost of attendance tells us how much financial aid the student can get at a particular school during that academic year. So now that we know how much financial aid they're getting, now we need to figure out what kind that's going to be. So once the So a college or university receives the FAFSA. We use the EFC to determine the student's financial need, which is kind of the first step in determining what type of financial aid they're getting. We subtract that expected family contribution amount from the cost of attendance, and the resulting number is the financial need. Financial need tells us the maximum amount of merit-based and need-based aid a student can receive at that school during that year. So if you picture financial aid as a big 5-gallon bucket, and there's a fill line somewhere on that bucket, we can pour in up to that fill line scholarships, grants, subsidized loans, and work study, just up to that fill line. But to fill up the rest of the bucket for the rest of their financial aid package, we can then pour in non-need-based aid, so the unsubsidized loans and the offer of Parent Plus loans. Go to the next. So at this point in time, additional information might be required. Schools are going to start sending out award letters once they've gone through that whole process. For students who fill out their FAFSA in October, you can expect to start receiving award letters beginning in December and then shortly thereafter. I saw some schools send them out in January last year and some even in February. So on that award notification, it's going to tell you all the financial aid awards a student is receiving, their cost of attendance, and it's going to give some further instructions on what to do from that point. For about 30% of all applicants through the FAFSA, they'll be selected for a process called FAFSA verification. And verification occurs when the Department of Ed notifies the college or university that they need to collect some information from the student in their household in order to verify the information on their FAFSA was filed accurately. So colleges and universities might ask for worksheets about your household, about your expenses sometimes. We might ask for copies of a tax return transcript if you weren't able to use that data retrieval tool. We might ask for income statements like your W-2s and 1099s, and even Schedule Cs if you own a business from your tax return. If your student is not selected for verification, then they may still have some additional requirements they need to complete. Some schools are going to have a student officially accept or decline their financial aid. They may have to complete scholarship requirements for that particular institution. If they're going to borrow loans, they'll have to complete entrance counseling and a master promissory note. The number one thing to remember is that at the time that the student receives award letters, they won't have decided where they're attending. They won't have to decide that usually until closer to the start of May. But these award letters may have some deadlines associated with them. So they might be, it has to be turned in, by a specific date or within 2 weeks or something like that. And it's really important, regardless of the number of schools that require the documentation, that you respond to each of them and turn that information into them. Because for a lot of schools, meeting those deadlines means the difference between confirming a student's financial aid and canceling their financial aid. And so if a student decides that they want to go to a school eventually, they want to make sure that their financial aid information is confirmed at that school. So it's very important to meet the deadlines and the next steps that every school requests.
Can I ask another quick question, Carrie? If there was a situation where maybe there was a divorce in a family or a loss of a job, because I heard you say, if I'm not mistaken, those filling out the FAFSA here pretty soon, they're going to be referencing the 2016 tax return. So let's say that a divorce or a job loss or a dramatic drop in income has occurred from that, since that point, and so there's been a change in circumstance. Does the student, parents, do they have any options in, I guess, I don't want to say fighting the 2016 numbers, but I guess trying to see if they would qualify for a different level of aid given those new circumstances?
Yes, and I'll talk more about it at the end of the presentation, but because it kind of depends on timing and it depends on what the circumstance is.
Okay.
So at this point, when they're going to fill out the FAFSA, so between 2016 and sometime in 2017, parents got divorced. When they fill out the FAFSA, it's going to ask what their marital status is of today, the day that they're filling out the FAFSA, and then it's also going to ask them how they filed. If there's a discrepancy in that, then they're going to ask them to separate out the income for the household of the student that's filing. So if the student lives with mom and then mom is going to be the one on the FAFSA, and the student is going, or the mom is going to have to separate out her income from what was on the tax return. And then there's going to be some additional steps that they need to take with the schools to make sure that that information is correct.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of the types of financial aid that are available, the federal government provides financial aid. The aid that you see at the top there, the Pell Grant, the Teach, and the FEOG, those are all grants that students can use toward their educational expenses and never have to repay. The FEOG is one of those first come, first serve awards that I mentioned earlier. Students who fill out their FAFSA in October 1st or shortly thereafter are going to have a good chance of getting some of those first come, first serve awards, whereas students who wait to file their FAFSA until sometimes, later in October or even, into the new year, those students may not have access to those funds, even if they're financially eligible, because they're limited funds that the school receives, and they give it as students are applying for their FAFSA. And so those are exhaustible. So federal work study is also a first come, first serve award, but it doesn't often apply directly to the student's bill. Normally funds that are coming from a federal work study grant, and that means that a department that hires the student to work on campus in a work study job uses that grant to pay the student their wages. If the student does not have federal work study, they can still get a job on campus. This is going to be a non-work study job. And all that means is that the department that hires them is going to pay their wages out of their own departmental budget. There's also loans that are offered to students through the federal government by filling out the FAFSA, and that's the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Each of those loans are awarded to the student in the student's name only. Parents are not co-signers for those. The subsidized loan is an interest-free loan while the student is in school, and the unsubsidized loan accrues interest while the student is in school, but they're given the option to pay that interest on a quarterly basis. What I always recommend to students is that if they are able to pay that interest on that quarterly basis, that's going to save them some money in the long run because it's compounding interest. But again, they're not required to do that. Neither of those loans have a penalty for early repayment. So if you find $5 on the sidewalk, you're going to throw it at those loans, and they're not going to expect that every month or every week. Once the student graduates from college, they have a 6-month grace period before they have to start repaying those loans. So that will give them some time to get settled into their career or their next endeavor and be able to kind of get their budget straight to start paying those loans back. There might be a third loan that you see on your student's award notification, and that's the Parent Plus loan. The Parent Plus loan is also a federal loan. It is available for students to, or parents to apply for in their own name if they choose to. It's not a required loan, it's an optional loan. It is credit worthy though, so if you're approved and you want to use it, you can absolutely do that. If you are denied for that loan, then the student gets an additional amount of an unsubsidized loan in the student's name. So sometimes that's a much better option for a student rather than going through a private bank or a private lender that can be more expensive for them. The state of Michigan also offers financial aid to students. Their only need-based award is the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, and that means that the student has to maintain or has to earn a 1200 or better on their SAT, and they also have to complete their FAFSA no later than March 1st of their senior year of high school. Nobody on the call is going to have a problem with that because you're all going to complete it October 1st. You won't ever run into that March 1st deadline. There are some additional scholarships that are offered by the state. Some of the 3 most popular are TIP, or a tuition incentive program, the Michigan Indian Tuition Waiver, and the Children of Veterans Tuition Grant. There are a lot of others that are often offered based on a student's life circumstances or their academic pursuits, and those will be listed on the Michigan website that I'll put up at the end. But students are going to apply for those through usually a PDF or an online application the state puts out. Those are not automatically awarded like the Michigan Competitive Scholarship. However, they also don't require the FAFSA. So a student can, when they see that they're eligible for that, they can fill out the application by the deadline and receive a response independent of their FAFSA application. As I mentioned earlier, some students will also have a MET or an MESP or a different 529 plan, and those again won't count toward a student's financial aid package since it's your first. Colleges and universities also provide financial aid to students. Something I want to emphasize here is that the available aid at a school is unique to the school. So if a student decides that they're going to transfer institutions at some point during their college career, their financial aid may be impacted, because if they're getting a high value of institutional aid at their first school and they transfer, that institutional aid is not going to follow them to their new school. So it's definitely something that students should consider as they're looking for colleges, making sure that they find some place they're going to be for 4 years, or understand that their finances are going to be impacted if that's important to their decision. Some schools may have their own application process. Oakland, for example, we use our students' admission application to award all of our merit scholarships, and we use their FAFSA to award all of their need-based grants. Some schools will have an institutionally developed application where they have a 1 or 2 page PDF or an online application that applies for all of the scholarships at that school. There are some schools still that will use a CSS Profile, which is a little bit more formalized application used to award institutional aid only. If a student is going to use the CSS Profile, what they need to be aware of is some of the differences between the profile and the FAFSA. The profile is used at a little over 400 colleges and universities across the country. And so what that does for the student is that it applies for the institutional aid only. The schools that you see on the screen are for Michigan only. You can go to that website at the bottom, css.collegeboard.org, to look at colleges that use that application across the country. But those are going to be schools where students have to fill out a FAFSA and a CSS Profile in order to apply for federal, state, and NC. There are some differences between the CSS Profile and the FAFSA. Most notably is the profile costs money, whereas FAFSA, as we determined earlier, is free. Parents can create a separate account from the student on the profile to keep their financial information separate, but that is not a feature of the FAFSA. The FAFSA requires, as well as one application, it's the student's application, and in most cases requires the parent's information to be included. That means that if your student logs on to their FAFSA, they'll be able to see your information. If you log in, you'll be able to see theirs. In a divorced or a separated household, typically the custodial parent provides information, but in some cases, the school will require non-custodial parent information as well. On the FAFSA, that works a little bit differently because the FAFSA only requires one household's information. And they determine it slightly differently than the CSS Profile. On the FAFSA, the residence of the student where they live 51% or more of the time is considered to be their primary household, and that's whose information goes on the FAFSA. For students who their living situations are in reality split 50-50 and they live both with mom and with dad pretty equally, then that's going to default to a secondary question, which is who provides the most financial support for the student at 51% or more. The types of necessary information are pretty much the same. Any demographic information, taxed and untaxed income information will be used on both applications. The only difference is that the CSS Profile will always ask for asset information, and the FAFSA will only sometimes ask for that information. The last bit of difference is that the CSS Profile can take anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours to complete. However, the FAFSA, as we mentioned earlier, only takes about 20 to 30 minutes. So depending on the amount of time or the amount of information that you have to provide on the CSS Profile, the FAFSA is likely to go pretty quickly for you. In terms of private resources, I always suggest students start with information or resources that are closest to them, things that they're personally involved with. The high school guidance office is a great place to start for local scholarships because those are often given to students in that high school senior class or within the seniors of that community. So their pool of competition is much smaller. Any social or religious organizations that families are a part of will often offer scholarships as well. And then even employers of the parents or employers of the students could also offer scholarships. There's also large online databases called clearinghouses where students can go and fill out profiles of their talents and their academic areas of interest, and it will sort through the database for them to tell them what scholarships they're eligible to apply for. The three that you see listed on the screen are the ones that we recommend at Oakland, primarily because they are not owned by private lenders, and so they therefore don't push that private loan agenda very much. So this is a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, some private or some circumstances that may change in your employment. If your personal life, it may change if you have a loss of benefits, or for example, if you're receiving child support and that child support is now cut off, or if you're changed from being married to divorced. And sometimes that significantly impacts the financial circumstances in your household. And what happens is that the FAFSAs no longer accurately represent the financial situation. And so if that happens, and it's negatively impacted, then you should contact the school the student chooses to attend and let them know there's been a change in circumstance. For those instances, that's going to be things that happen after the FAFSA is filed or while the student is in college. And that school will take into consideration the circumstance you're appealing, and they will tell the student if they're eligible for any additional or different type of financial aid that can help them get through that semester or that school year. If it's something that's taken place before you file the FAFSA, then in most cases that situation is going to be accounted for on the FAFSA. If it's not accounted for on the FAFSA, then you follow the same kind of circumstances. Once the student gets their award notification, you contact the school and let them know that the FAFSA doesn't accurately represent that circumstance in your household. So some next steps that students can take, and there's going to be some websites on here that you definitely want to copy down. There are various things that you can do to prepare for the FAFSA coming up in the next, week and a half, I think it is now. The first and foremost you want to do is make sure that your FSA ID is created. So each student and one parent in the household each needs to create an FSA ID for themselves. There is a worksheet available on our website that I will tell you how to get to in just a moment. But you can record your information on that worksheet so that you can make sure that you're getting your information correct, and that if you ever need to reset the FSA ID and things like that, that you've gotten all the security questions written down and you remember what they are. Definitely a helpful thing. Continue to attend events and ask questions. This webinar is a great way to get some additional information about financial aid or some basic information down, but you should continue to attend events on a college campus, especially for students who are seriously considering a certain institution. If they can go set their feet on that campus at several different types of events, that's really going to help them understand where a good fit is for them to attend and where they're going to be the most academically successful. You can get that free financial aid help that I mentioned through Oakland University. We offer several things that are open to the public. This is the website that you want to copy down, oakland.edu/financial-services/events. On that website, you'll find 3 different tabs. The first is a financial aid information sessions tab. And on that website, that tab, is a video of this presentation. So if you have friends and family that weren't able to join the webinar today, or you forget something that was said and you want to make sure that you can hear it again or get a refresher when you get the award letters, you can go to that website and listen to that video. And that will get you all the same information that you got today. There's also, on the FAFSA Workshops tab, the ability to sign up to come to one of Oakland's campuses and get help filling out the FAFSA. This is open to the public, so you don't have to have applied to Oakland or be interested in attending Oakland, but it's definitely something that's important for families who are struggling with the FAFSA to get some help with it. They are individual private family appointments with one of the senior financial aid outreach advisors like myself, and you sit down with us in our office and you fill out the FAFSA, and we're right there to help along with you. There's also, on that FAFSA workshop page, there is the worksheet for the FSA ID that you can download and record that information. There's also an award letter workshops tab, and on that tab there is a worksheet that will help you kind of determine what the bottom line is at every school your student is considering. So once you start getting award letters, that will help you interpret the information that's there. You can also use the FAFSA forecaster and the net price calculator. The FAFSA forecaster is going to be on FAFSA.gov, and it gives you an estimated EFC, which was not helpful in and of itself, but if you partner that with the net price calculator, which is available on every college and university's website, then that's going to give you some great information about their cost of attendance. In most cases, that will tell you an estimated financial aid package as well. So you don't have to wait till December, or if you have junior students next year, you can do that right now. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of applying for private scholarships, especially if students want to reduce or decline altogether their student loans. That's going to get them some additional funding that they'll be able to use to pay for all their direct charges and indirect expenses as well. My final piece of advice, this is my favorite piece of advice for parents. Work with your student, not for your student. Don't fill out the FAFSA for them. Make sure that you're sitting down with students to do it together. Once they get to a college campus, we only talk to the students for the most part. There's actually federal regulations in place that say that we can't share information about a student with anyone but the student. So sometimes that can be difficult for parents, especially with financial aid information. But doing it with your student now ensures that they're going to have some base of knowledge to be able to communicate to you clearly and accurately the information that we're sharing with them. My last piece of advice, and this goes for everybody that I ever talk to, if your student does not need a loan, please don't let them take a loan. It's really important for students to start now considering their lifestyle that they want after college and what kind of debt they're going to be in and how they're going to pay that debt off. So it's something really important to start considering now. They don't need that loan if it's going to be a big pile of money that they're not going to use toward their education, then they shouldn't be taking it out in the first place. Lastly, if you can switch slides, if you have questions after today, of course, email Nick. He reaches out to me quite frequently, and if he's got something that he can't answer, he will certainly contact me, and I will get a response to him. You can also contact your high school guidance counselors. They know a lot of information. When you visit a campus, or if your student is considering an institution, feel free to contact their financial aid office and their admissions folks. We're really eager to make this a smooth transition for you. And of course, there's federal, state websites. They've got a lot of information on there, especially that state website for those application-based awards, those clearinghouses, and then our financial aid help website.
Great. Well, thanks a million, Carrie. I really appreciate you carving out some time again for us, and always blown away by your expertise in an area that obviously causes a lot of confusion. So thanks again for taking the time to give us some additional guidance today. I know, absolutely. I know you mentioned that there's a link, I think on one of the previous slides, to view a copy of Carrie's typical presentation, but we're also going to be emailing a copy of the webinar link out probably within about a week's time. So keep your eyes open for that email where, we'll have a recording of today's conversation. And as Carrie mentioned, if you have questions on it as you're going back through it, don't hesitate to reach out, or don't hesitate to pass it along to friends or family who you feel, could benefit from the information. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you visit our website, www.centerfinplan.com, you're going to find all sorts of educational topics on education planning. In addition to that, numerous blogs, webinars, et cetera, on various financial planning topics that I would encourage everyone to check out. So once again, thank you very much for everyone's time today and attending, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.